Hi, I'm Lance Wallnow, and welcome to the next episode of Firewall. On this broadcast, we're going to be zeroing in on what's coming up with this election, and we're going to have details on the races and on the role that you can play in affecting the destiny of the United States. My special guest is an expert on this subject, John Graves, and he has an organization called millionvoices.org. You can check that out because that's where we're going to be getting the data from. And my question for John is, what is Million Voices? We're going to go into that right now.
Lance, the reason I called it Million Voices is because too many people, over 30 million evangelicals, don't vote, don't pray, or get involved. And we wanted to start to find 1 million new voices who would get engaged and show up for the first time. And it can make a massive difference in this election.
Well, the last election, just in the midterms alone, right? Or no, I'm sorry, midterms, but in the swing states was what? How many?
77,000 votes. 10,000, 22,000, 44,000 in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which is 0.0005% of the 138 million. Properly placed, that made all the difference.
Amazing, amazing data. So talk to us about this, and where do you want to begin? Because this is a whole universe for us right now.
Yeah, I think to me, one of the big things we can talk about is the voter guides. George Barna said that 75% of evangelicals rely on a nonpartisan voter guide. And the reason, Lance, is they don't trust the media. They don't trust the PACs. They don't trust the parties. And so they want the facts. You hear the term fake news. The president speaks about it quite a bit. Well, the fake news is spinning something and not telling people the truth. And so when you give them factual information that's footnoted on the issues that they care about.
So John, how many people don't vote? And because I'm always hearing these statistics floated around about Christians, and it gets me crazy. Evangelicals, pro-life Catholics that actually don't care enough to participate. Yep. So how many are we talking about?
So George Barna in 2012 determined that there were 39 million born-again evangelicals who did not show up. That's narrowly defined, not people who just believe in God. Most all experts agree it's at least 25, probably 30 million plus that just stay home in a presidential election. And about a third of those aren't even registered, actually.
And a third of them aren't even registered. So is this because, like in some places, like I'm sure, like in California, they say, what's the use? There's a lot of that there, but what about the swing states?
The swing states is just as bad. One of the dynamics, and I'm going to make a prediction on your show. You're good at prophesying the future that comes to pass. People are not going to expect one of the things I think is going to be a dynamic in the Rust Belt this time. In 2016, there were a lot of people, and I know a lot of them, where they were demoralized because for 30 years their votes haven't mattered in that state, especially for the president. They never dreamed Donald Trump could actually win that election in Michigan.
Rust Belt, for those of us that are in Texas here,
yes,
is what?
So
what states?
Oh, okay. So a lot of these states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, it's been since 1984, or in Minnesota, 1972, since it's been anything but a Democrat at the top of the ticket. So there's a lot of people that thought it's hopeless here. It's the blue wall, right?
Right.
They saw what happened in 2016. Wait a minute, my vote might matter. You're going to see a lot of those people come, Lance.
And it does. So what we got here is the key states that are up for grabs.
That's right.
So I've seen some there that I didn't know were.
It'll shock you. Texas was a single-digit state. Ohio, Iowa, but there are 20 states, 18 full states and 2 partial states that determine 230 of the Electoral College votes, Lance. Out of 270, you need 270 to win. 230 were decided by single digits. And a lot of those, 0.4 New Hampshire, 0.2 Michigan, 0.8 Wisconsin. I mean, wow. Razor thin Pennsylvania, 0.7%. And so those are the states that are going to matter, and 12 to 14 of them, and almost all of those include Senate races.
Now, this is so important because, so many of us are really you've been doing this for years. A lot of us got involved with electoral politics when we started looking at culture. We started looking at Seven Mountains, got me into Trump. And then Trump opened up. Then by the time they had the Russia probe and everything, I started going, wow, I didn't know the Seven Mountains were that corrupted. I just thought it was, we're not there. Yeah. But in a case like this, as I'm looking up here, those Senate races are significant, and we focus on the presidential, but what happens, like they want to pack the court. I'm hearing all the, Vice President Biden is not denying in the last debate. He wouldn't say that they don't want to pack the court. He's just saying vote, vote. In other words, I'm not going to commit to not packing the court because you're going to love to see what, Puerto Rico and District of Columbia as part of the United States. What is the role of the Senate in that?
Yeah, so the Senate, in both, you asked two questions really there. If they add senators, they're going to have 4 more senators to win all the votes. Right now it's a 53-47 split. It's the Senate that confirms all the judges.
There we go.
Okay, Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, all the way down, and we can talk about that if you want to. But what is critical about the Senate is they're the firewall in some cases to hold back an out-of-control House or an out-of-control White House. And so that's really what's at stake. And the founders were brilliant. The House can swing wildly because it's all 435 people every 2 years. They purposely and brilliantly, I believe, split it to have something that wasn't so flowing with the tide and ebbing with the cultural changes so quickly. The senators stagger a third of them every 6 years. So it's meant to slow things down and let cooler heads prevail.
So I want you guys to think about this, because this is really profound in the way that they did this. When you have a dynamic nation, look how much division, how much tension we have right now. They built in elasticity, almost like in a big skyscraper, how they can handle earthquakes is they're built in with a design so they can handle some sway like that. Yes. Congress is the passion pulse. It's like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to... And so you have the pitchforks and the torches, and they're coming out to change something. But the Senate's a 6-year deliberate. So the way that the founders said was it's going to be the hot water is boiling over, but it gets poured into the cooler tea kettle. Yep. And it's got 6 years. That's a little bit more maturity of what's the impact of this radical moment going to be like. And of course, in the country right now, it was like to your point, the Supreme Court, the Senate, the Congress, and the executive. There's supposed to be a balance between executive, legislative, and courts, and we've lost the balance. Everything goes to the court to make a decision.
Yes, that's right.
You can't afford to have any more imbalance in this country.
That's right. And the brilliance of our founders, when I was I'm an attorney and an ordained pastor, but when I was in law school, my constitutional law professor selected, he had been Chief Justice Rehnquist for 2 different terms, chief clerk. And he was hired by an European nation to rewrite their constitution. So he was a devout Catholic, so he picked 12 of us disciples to do all his work for him. And so we had to read all the founding documents of all the constitutions. My assignment was Russia, the Soviet Union. I was stunned that they had more freedom of speech, more freedom of religion, more rights in their Bill of Rights and in their constitution. What they didn't have is what people miss. They did not have separation of powers.
Oh.
Madison said, if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. And if one body is going to make the law and then decide whether they're going to enforce it or not and decide how they're going to interpret it, it's too much power all in one place and it becomes corrupt every time. So we have a system where the executive enforces what the legislature creates and the courts interpret. And the saddest thing in our nation right now, Lance, is we're losing those. The House is so dysfunctional and the Senate that the presidents are doing more and more executive orders. And if they stack these courts, they're going to politicize the courts, and we've now lost and become one branch of government.
I want to rewind the tape real quick before we leave the Senate, because this is so critical. Everybody's talking about president, and I'm concerned. We have congressional seats.
That's right. 435.
But how many are up in this next cycle?
All 435 House seats are up. Probably 30 to 56 are within the margin of error. And then there's 24 Republicans, 12 Democrats up this cycle that are up for their seats. So it could swing wildly. There are 8 within the toss-up margin.
Oh, this is so important. All right, so those are there voter guides going to come out for the Senate? Because I'm sure people don't even know. People don't even know the presidential voter guide, let alone what the senators and congressmen do. Now, let me just be honest about it. When I go in and vote, it's terrible to say this, but we are so bad. Unless we know someone like you, which is why I'm glad you're on our show now. People don't even know who represents what. And it's like you're by the seat of your pants trying to figure out, well, I don't know who they are.
Yeah, we'll have one for 14 different Senate races that are within the margin of error. We'll have every one of those on our website, millionvoices.org.
Millionvoices.org. All right, so we just got about 20 seconds in this segment. Where are you going to take us next, just out of curiosity? Oh, wait a second. You got 30 million non-voters, 135,000 churches? What's that?
135,000 churches that are biblical-based churches, which means they're aligned with the Bible in those 20 states. And so we work with those churches and with those people.
All right, so, folks, we're going to be back in a minute to go see where those 135,000 churches are taking us.
As a pandemic wreaks havoc and angry mobs burn our cities, Lance Wallnau explains why this is happening and takes you into the ancient text he describes as God's Chaos Code. This is the exciting sequel to Lance's best-selling book, God's Chaos Candidate, where he predicted Donald Trump would be president. God's Chaos Code predicts this exact moment in history and what is coming next.
When you're in the midst of shaking and uncertainty, the one thing that can give you confidence is knowing what God has said about the time that you're in. If the Lord tells you ahead of time what's going to happen, you can be certain things are going to be working out. The Lord has given us that code in the Bible. He's told us what's coming in America, what's coming to the nations. He's literally given us the chaos code. We can understand what's happening and be awakened in the midst of it. You need to understand and get this chaos code.
You need to know the code. Order God's Chaos Code now at godschaoscode.com.
Welcome back to Firewall. We have our special guest right now. I forgot about this in your introduction. Pastor and lawyer. And he's actually our political science expert as well. So you're like a man for all seasons, a Renaissance man. John, we're going to be talking now about one of my favorite parts of what you do, which is being able to know what in the world these candidates actually are representing.
Yeah, it's fascinating in the age of fake news. It spins to the left, it spins to the right. We try to focus on the facts of the top 10 to 12, 14 biblical issues that people care about. It's at the Supreme Court. Is it life? Is it marriage? Is it religious freedom? What are the issues that believers care about? That's what we focus on. And every one of these voter guides, you'll notice when you see the link, okay, has a footnote on the issue where the candidate said it. So in 2016, in the last debate, when Hillary Clinton said, if you're for traditional marriage or you're pro-life, I'm not your candidate. She's not hiding from that fact. We just document the fact of that's what her stance is on biblical marriage and on...
Which was really the big boo-boo for her with the basket of deplorable comment, because she basically outed herself in terms of where the voter guide takes you.
Exactly.
So you got this voter guide. So what does O mean and S mean real quick?
So oppose or support. So we try to make it simple. I call it put the cookies on the lowest shelf. This stuff gets so complicated. Our team spends so much time to make it simple, one page. And if you want to get the details and the minutia and the videos or the articles where they say it, you can click the link.
Okay, so there's a link over there. So there's the data sources. So if you go, oh, I don't believe that, well, here's where it comes from.
There it is. And it's also constitutionally vetted. Alliance Defending Freedom, Matt Staver, and Kelly Shackelford all review it and look at it as constitutionally approved, even to hand out in your church.
I got to say this because I put this in the book on purpose with a link for this voter guide, that the Christians especially, you don't make a decision on anything based upon a personality. The Bible says judge righteous judgment. Yeah. So you never go based on what a face looks like. You'd be surprised how many people vote based on the telegenic or the demographic, or are they my skin color? Are they my age? So you got Ocasio, well, look, she's young, she's pretty, and she's putting in the his Latino or Hispanic vote. It's crazy. Christians should be judging based on the Word of God. And so we start with the principles. That's why the voter guide is so important. You start with the principles, then you go to the platform, because your principles tell you what the platform and the policy should be. Then you start looking at the politician. You don't start with the face. You start with the principles and the platform and the policies. This takes you under the surface.
Exactly. You said it a very similar way to a pastor friend of mine. He says the way we ought to make these decisions is based on principles, based on policies, maybe based on parties, which, by the way, we'll have at millionvoices.org a party breakdown between the two, and then personality. He said the problem in our culture is we turn it upside down.
We
And
make it
look
all
at the
based on personality. And oh my gosh. Anyway, okay, so this is going to be for Senate's coming, and
Senate, governor, president, and it's pretty fascinating if you look at it. There was an interesting article by F.H. Buckley in the Wall Street Journal. When Donald Trump won, it shocked everyone. And what most people don't realize is how in the world did that happen? It shocked both sides of the establishment, if you will. It shocked both sides of the spinning news to the right or the left. And if you look at an economic versus social conservative demographic, on this scale, you'll see where Hillary's votes were in that bottom left quadrant. It is the economic and conservatives that are socially liberal, which are a lot of people in the Republican establishment. But it was in that top left quadrant where he shocked everybody, where what we call the white union Democrat workers in the Rust Belt, that's what just the blue wall shocked everybody. He was speaking to them on moral issues and not far, hard, right economic policies.
So just so I get this and I'm clear, the bottom part there below that middle line is talking about the lower left, it's social issues.
Yes. So if you go left to right, it's economic. You're liberal on the left, economic, where Hillary's support was, and you're conservative economic. But on the bottom, you're liberal on social issues.
Okay, so who are these people on the lower right here?
The lower right would be the establishment Republicans, the country club Republicans.
So like the Koch brothers and stuff like that?
The Koch brothers would be a good example there. They're more libertarians on those issues. They kind of don't want to get into social issues a lot of times. And so on the bottom right would be what I call it is mammon Republicans. They're conservative, but mammon is really what they're
this is your old school country club. This is your Mitt Romneys and your McCain.
Mitt Romney's
and
a
they
good
got
example.
contracts with the Pentagon, big dollar contracts with Raytheon and all that stuff. So
there you go. But it's the social conservatives at the top two quadrants where everything changed, where even if your economic policies, maybe, for example, you wanted jobs to come back to America. You didn't just want the cheapest thing. Or maybe you wanted a little bit higher wage, or maybe you wanted to bring jobs back to America. Those were the things he was talking about that were not traditional Republican talking points.
So he got the social automatically, in a sense, because he really courted evangelicals and pro-life Catholics. So
he did.
So he kind of lined up and said, I'm with you and you're with me.
Yep.
Then he swung over to economic populism.
Yep. There you go.
And the economic populist message
That's
resonated with that upper left
That's
quadrant,
it.
which is where, and a number of Democrats actually bolted from, I think they recognized that he's talking more about like the Rust Belt issues, manufacturing. He has more of our future. And then with the border, they're realizing, it's funny about this is some data. We're looking at this in Europe right now in terms of the election cycles, because I'm saying, John, that Europe is 2 years ahead of the United States in terms of a prophetic cycle. So what you've got there is Viktor Orban, you got Poland, you have the movement that's going on in Italy. What's taking place is that nationalism, which is religious-based nationalism, Christian nationalism, which has its Catholic roots, is asserting itself and saying, we don't want to lose our culture. We want the advantages of economic union. We do not want to sacrifice our distinctive history and culture, because patriotism is actually high in those nations. So none of them really, you ever see an Olympic game or a soccer game? Nobody wants to have a universal flag. It's Quaker State Oil isn't the flag. They want to have a country.
That's right.
So we're right now in a place that's kind of like lagging behind there. But that group up on the top is where the backlash can come from in America. If these things swing, as we're seeing institutionally, into a power grab that tries to suppress, keep your eye on that demographic, because that's a chunk of America that says, we have to govern for both of us. This isn't an all or nothing. This isn't a one side wins game.
That's a fascinating look, and maybe we could segue into this, because to me, what holds that is the courts. And if Trump has any legacy, it is 3 Supreme Court justices in one term, unprecedented, and 25, if not 30%, of the Court of Appeals, which handled 98%.
Show us how this works. Here again, we don't understand it. You got a graphic for it?
I do have a graphic for that. So basically, most people only think about the Supreme Court because that's the one that gets the most controversial thing. But the Supreme Court only handles 100 to 150 cases a year. It's the middle layer, the Court of Appeals, that handle 98% of cases.
So this is what you're talking
never
about, the
get up to
Ninth
the Supreme
Circuit Court of Appeals, and these are actually regionally.
They are.
Okay,
they
so
are
they're
in
regional.
each region. So in
Right.
Texas and Arkansas, Oklahoma, it'll be the Fifth Circuit. It'll be
I
the Ninth
gotcha.
Circuit in California. First
What
Circuit.
is it about the Ninth Circuit? Where is that located? Let me
California.
guess. You got there before me. I was going to say California, Portland, whatever.
Yes,
Okay.
and it's the D.C. Circuit is First Circuit is maybe even more liberal than the Ninth Circuit. You know, you get into the two eastern coast, right? New York, California, and the D.C. area is kind of where it is. But 98% of the cases never go beyond the Court of Appeals.
7,000 courts, are they primarily Democrat, Republican?
Well, these are 7,000 cases that are heard
7,000 cases,
annually.
sorry.
That's
Okay.
right. So the judges that are on there, I could even show you a graphic. So if you look at this on the far left here, this is what it looked like when President Trump took over. You can see the blue on the left represents those Court of Appeals justices who deal with 98% of all cases appointed by Democrats. The ones in red, obviously a significant minority. Well, then you go 2 years forward.
Now, notice in the middle, though, I want people to see this, vacant.
That's right.
So you've even got some data there on vacancies.
And you know why that happened. President Trump mentioned this in his first debate. Mitch McConnell and the Republicans took over towards the end of Obama's term and stopped appointing and confirming them willy-nilly like this. And so they began to stack up, about 120 federal judge, Court of Appeals judges. And so a lot of them were vacant. As they approach 65, there's kind of a shifting over to bring somebody else, and they go on kind of a retired status and rotate depending on where they are. And so that's the average age. There's two fascinating things about the court with President Trump. One is he began to fill those seats because he had the Senate. You know now he doesn't have the House, he still has the Senate. It's almost the only thing he can do because the House and the Senate won't get along and do anything bipartisan. And so he begins to fill the courts.
Dang.
And so you can see by the end of this term, look at how nothing is central, everything is toward the left. It's starting to normalize to balance in 2018, and then the balance tips towards the end of this election cycle.
So we now see the 6th, 7th, 8th, 2nd, 4th, and 5th Circuit courts are now have enough appointments made. And what's that 3rd, 10th, and 11th? Are they
those are kind of in the balance, and they're kind of limited, and they've got some vacancies that we're trying to see how those are kind of it's equal right now. It's not kind of tilted one way or another. They may have 10 of one and 10 of another, but you still see the 1st, the 9th, and the DC. Those are the three most liberal.
My gosh.
The 9th Circuit is getting very, very close. So here's what's going to happen. Depending on the election in 2020, if the Democrats come back in, with the Democrats in White House, Biden and Kamala Harris win, and the Senate wins, all of that then gets reversed. So what you're talking about, protecting the people and the culture, is protected by the courts. It really is.
The courts really is the firewall when it comes down to the legislation that will take away your rights. But then they kick it up to the Supreme Court. I mean, this is so classic with the left.
Yep.
What they can't get you to agree with them on, they will, with legislation, they'll take to the court by litigation.
And so that's how, if you look in the last 50 years, what have been the most devastating cultural damages from a Christian standpoint? Take prayer out of school. The courts did it. The White House didn't do it. 60 million humans have been sacrificed legally because of Roe versus Wade. That happened in the courts. The White House didn't pass that. The House didn't pass that.
Yeah.
Gay marriage. It happened in the courts.
It happened in the court. And here's the insidious thing, that public opinion is really in favor of life. They're just trying to figure out how to make it work. Certainly, you don't have public opinion in favor of killing babies that survive an abortion or that are separated from the mother. But with gay marriage, we found something else. I was curious that public opinion was not behind it.
Yep.
So the court did it, and then President Obama bathes the White House with pink and rainbow colors. And it's like we could see that was the agenda they had. But here's the thing. Because of the psychological role that the court has in the minds of people, it's perceived as being the legitimizer.
That's right.
Almost like a righteous judge. Well, the Supreme Court said it. And so what happened is the shift in public opinion didn't happen because of the persuasion of media. It happened because the courts went that way.
Yep. You're exactly right. And it goes back to what you said earlier. You said the House is the one that's the pitchfork and the fire and the passion. The Senate is meant to slow that down. What's meant to slow it down even more than the Senate? The courts. They're appointed for life. They're not even appointed every 6 years, every third of them. They're appointed for life, meant to go, whoa,
John,
whoa.
I can't believe how we're running out of time. I just looked up and I realized the show's over. This was it's like a freight train.
We'll come back.
Well, we're going to have you back again. God'sChaosCode.com/vote. That's one way that we can reach out and get behind the Million Voice, voice.org. I really want you to do this right now. Get a pencil, get a pen, write down God'sChaosCode.com/vote so you can get a hold of these voter guides. And people can share these with others real quick.
That's right.
They can share them, right?
Here's what I would say. The only person more influential than a pastor is a close friend who knows about politics. Your listeners could be the ones that change this election and everything we've just talked about.
And maybe we'll do another broadcast about how you guys could be using text and other things to share with people in other states.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to see you again next week on Firewall.
I see what's going on in America right now and I'm sad. I wish I could vote in this election. Tens of millions of Christians did not vote in 2016. I don't understand why. I hope America is still a free country when I turn 18, because I will vote. Why are you willing to let the ungodly run this country? Please vote in this election. Please vote for those who want to return America to our biblical foundations. Vote for the platform, not the person.
Lance Wallnau has just released his latest book, God's Chaos Code.
You need to know the code. You need to know what's happening right now. There is a code in the chaos. There's a purpose in the shaking. Once you see this, it's going to give stability and strength to you. God is literally raising up an awakening generation right now. It's hidden in the code.
You need to know the code. Order God's Chaos Code now at God'sChaosCode.com.
On next week's episode of Firewall with Lance Wallnau.
In North Carolina, 2014 Senate race, I show the pastor the data. He looks at the data and he's stunned at how few people. He did one simple thing. He put a pie chart up on the monitor before voting, and he said, if we say that we're salt and light, and we say that we want to change the culture, and we say that we want to do something different, he goes, and half of us aren't showing up to vote. I don't know which one of you votes and which one of you don't. I only know that this is the percentage of our church that doesn't, because we don't reveal names, obviously. 30% more people in that church from that little 2-minute sharing from that pastor. It was powerful. And what's more powerful of those 30%, it's the least engaged people that really change things, Lance.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Firewall with Lance Wallnau. For more information, visit lancewallnau.com.